Hello, welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 201. Joining me on today's show is Mance Rayder. He is the host of the Freeman Beyond the Wall podcast, the author of The Kids Are Not All Right and Freedom Through Memedom. You can find his work at freemanbeyondthewall.com. And just like this podcast, you can find his show on libertarianinstitute.org as well. So thanks so much for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. How you doing? I love your work. I try to listen whenever I can, and anytime you write something, I definitely look at it. So I appreciate what you do, man.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much. I think you actually had Will Porter on in the past to discuss one of the articles I co-authored with him.
Yeah. Will, I've had Will on a couple times now, and yeah, he's a great guy. I think he's going to do great things in the future. And that article that you guys wrote about the Afghani opium crop from last year, that was a really good article, and I was happy to have him on to talk about it.
Well, thanks so much. And kind of talking about Afghanistan, the Afghan war, that kind of brings me to something that you had on your show recently that I had almost completely forgotten about, but is actually very important. And that is the Pulse Nightclub shooting, where I think over 50 people ended up dying. While the initial spin on it was that this target was picked either because Omar Mateen was a gay man who wanted, had suppressed his sexuality and lashed out and killed other gay people, or was like maybe some crazy Muslim who ended up killing gay people. But you, kind of bring us up to date on this story. So, why don't you kind of tell us what's happened, during the trial and, what the real cause of the shooting was?
Well, wow, this was just crazy because I remember the day it happened. I'm a big gun guy, and whenever something happens like this, I always pay special attention, personal interest, just, wondering if they're going to, wait to see how they're going to use this to try and talk about taking away guns. So I looked at this when it first happened, and I remember the stories of, oh, he was on Grindr, he was on gay dating apps, and he was a repressed homosexual, but his faith in Islam would cause him to ignore that, or to, for lack of a better term, to be in the closet about it. They talked about how he was married and everything, but one thing that they talked about at the time that quickly got buried was the fact that when he was in the nightclub, he had talked with a hostage negotiator, and he had mentioned that he was doing this because the United States was dropping bombs in Syria and Iraq. And he mentioned those two countries specifically. And quickly that was put aside, and I forgot about it. There was some talk about, then they started talking about his dad. It turns out, I need to do a podcast on his dad because that's a whole nother just crazy thing there that, he may have ties to the U.S. government and, FBI informant kind of stuff that's coming out that's another thing that no one's reporting on, but it's coming out in legitimate sources are talking about it. But, it turns out that this guy was radicalized online. His search history had ISIS, has to do with ISIS, has to do with Al Qaeda, has to do with radical Islam. And he basically said that he did this thing because the United States was bombing Syria and bombing Iraq. So that story, I guess people don't want to hear it, just like San Bernardino. Those people, people who had lived here forever and, got radicalized because of United States and the excuse they use. And I know a lot of people don't want to accept the excuse that, because, our foreign policy shouldn't cause people to act like that. Well, you don't know how people are going to act. And if China was dropping bombs on parts of the United States and then did an invasion and put boots on the ground, I'm pretty sure that Americans would fight back and they would probably be called terrorists. So I'm not saying what they're doing is right. I'm saying that, from a human nature standpoint, I understand.
Right. And it's really interesting how this gets left out that, when it's the gun issue, then, we have to do all these things to prevent this from happening again. But then suddenly it turns out that war is the motivating factor. And it's the fact that, he was able to watch all these videos of little children dying in the Middle East, at the hands of the United States who are our allies. And that's what upset him. But then there's never a discussion about, there's something wrong with the war or anything like that. That never comes up. And once it turns out that's the motive, then the story kind of fades and nobody really talks about having to do anything or having the government change or change the lives of people to make it a safer place.
Well, and the crazy thing about this incident was that, in San Bernardino, you had a husband-wife team and both the husband and wife ended up dying at the end. Well, there's a surviving spouse here, and all of a sudden she was getting all this blame heaped on her, and she was arrested and she was taken in by the FBI. And it's just like, wait a minute, why is this happening? What narrative are they constructing? And, and I think it went past a lot of people that she got brought up in federal court on terrorism charges. And if it weren't for that trial, and even though they had that trial, and so many facts came out in that trial that are just absolutely astonishing, but not surprising to me, somebody who's followed the court system for a very long time, even before I was a libertarian. The fact that they looked for a scapegoat and they chose the wife, and then she was brought up on trial and she was found innocent of a terrorism charge, which almost never happens. And like I said, all the things that came out at trial that the government, that government agents did, it's just, this story is like, this would be a perfect, Netflix movie. It would be awesome because it's not even believable.
Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting is I kind of noticed this over the past, couple months as I've been reading stories about the trial, is that every time you see like a USA Today article, a New York Times article on the trial, the picture of the wife, I forget her name, is always the picture of him and her at the gun range together. And yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And in your show, I think you talked about like this woman had some cognitive deficiencies. Her IQ is like 80. Yeah. And so when they talk about, it seems like she was guilty, and I don't know, did she admit to anything, or was maybe kind of bullied into a confession early on or anything like that?
Well, let me just go back over her story. Her name is Noor Salman, and she was immediately put on trial in the press. I think people found it hard to believe that Mateen could do this alone. I think people look at what he did and find it hard to believe that she didn't know the fact that she's a Muslim. Immediately people are going to jump to conclusions that she would undoubtedly be on the side of her husband, which is that's some horrible, some horrible speculation right there. And I think that when Mateen died, there was such an outrage from a small but vocal activist group, such as the LGBT community. They needed someone to demonize, and they demonized the living hell out of her. I mean, there were signs all over Orlando about frying her, about burning her at the stake, how the LGBT community wouldn't stand for this. But, like you said, things came out in the trial that just shatter everybody's perception. Like, he chose Pulse at random. He had actually picked two other spots. One was a Disney spot and another was another downtown nightclub. And he went to those spots that night, but there was security there, which is a great, which you could do another show on, which isn't a really a foreign policy show, but it's, stuff that I talk about on my podcast, that if there is a show of security, people have a tendency to not want to challenge, people, put it this way, they look for soft targets. So what he did was he Googled, when he saw that there was security there, he Googled popular Orlando nightclubs. And Pulse came up. He drove to Pulse. He saw that there was no security but bouncers. He actually walked up to a bouncer and asked this question. And by asking this question, it puts to bed any thought that he shot this club up because these people were gay. Well, first of all, I mean, if he chose it at random, we know he didn't do it for that. But he walked up to a bouncer and said, "Hey, where are the women at?" He did not know that he was going to a gay club. He was just looking for a soft target, and he found it. So, do you want me to talk about some other of the revelations that came up in the trial?
Especially, yeah, absolutely. The father.
Yeah. Well, the father, I didn't really talk about the father that much in there because there are still, I guess some of the reporting on the father could still be considered, conspiratorial. There are some people who are trying to figure out exactly where he fits into all this. But, within 48 hours, Noor Salman, the wife, was interrogated for over 24 hours straight without sleep. Finally, she was what the FBI ended up admitting was coerced into writing a confession saying that she had cased Pulse with her husband. Within 48 hours of her signing that confession, they did, by tracking her electronics, they found out that she had never been anywhere near the Pulse nightclub. So, she's, combine a rather low IQ with somebody who had been kept up all night, who had to be, you can just imagine the state of mind of your husband, killing over 50 people and finding that out. And she cracked, did something stupid, but within 48 hours, the FBI knew that all of this was a lie and they still took it to court. And they presented all of this evidence as fact within 48 hours of retrieving it was all false. And my favorite part of this whole thing, because like I said, I've been looking at the judicial system for a very long time, was this judge actually seemed to be an honest actor. He was openly hostile to the state when upon a cross-examination of an FBI agent, the FBI agent admitted that within 48 hours, they knew they had no evidence on her. And his main thing was he cleared the jury out of the courtroom, but he did not clear the gallery. And openly in front of the prosecution and in front of the defense and in front of the gallery, he berated the state. And one of his main things was, I separated this woman from her child for 12 months on lies from you. And they said after that, even though the jury didn't witness any of that, the state had lost the whole courtroom, had lost the whole gallery. And, it's just amazing that there was a judge there, like I said, who was an honest actor. I love when Scott Horton talks about when you go into a courtroom, the judge, the police, the lawyers, they all work. They're all police and they all get paid from the same fund. So, it's very hard to consider any of them, if all that be true, it's very hard to consider that any of them would be a neutral party. And, I just got to give it to this judge, man. He did a great job, and, justice was done.
Right. I mean, there have been other cases, even like the Bundy case pretty recently is an example where at the very least the judge was honest enough to look at the obvious lies that the federal, enforcement agents were telling and said, BS, get out of my courtroom. And so, it's great that, those honest kind of moments can happen in American, whatever is left of the justice system still, even how infrequent it is. I mean, I was just reading yesterday about another kid, 17 years old in Texas, who FBI informants and agents, tricked him into, saying that he was going to blow something up. And now he's probably going to take a plea deal and end up with 20 years in jail.
Yeah. I mean, they can lie to you, but you can't lie to them. I was going to say about the Bundy judge, for even though that was dismissed with prejudice, so it can never be brought up again. It's very interesting that judge uh, in the beginning of that trial clearly stated that there were certain phrases that were not allowed to be used in the courtroom, like First Amendment rights, like Fourth Amendment rights. Yeah, she I remember when that happened and I was like, oh, this is going to be a railroading. But, it turned out the state had nothing. I mean, the state executed one of them. I mean, I call local police, state police. I call them all the state. I call them all the government. People think because they know a local police officer that they're not the government, but they are. They're an arm of the government. But, that was an interesting thing to happen. And, I had Jim Bovard on my show talking about that, and he went over it and, got a lot of good facts out of that. So, back to Pulse. Is there anything else that, you want to talk about?
I was actually going to move on to, the next episode of your show I wanted to talk about, which is episode 108. And in that show, you kind of, frame the Palestinian issue in a very interesting way as the Palestinians, being, I believe, the Native Americans. Do you want to explain how, you kind of framed the show? Because I think it was very powerful.
Yeah, it was actually a short episode. I think it only, I think I intended it to last about 30 minutes and it only ended up being about 17 or 18. But basically I made the case for the Native Americans had deserved their own homeland. They had been driven out of their homeland and that they deserved their own homeland. And I proposed that, it would be part of Montana because the population of Native Americans there was roughly the same population of Jewish landowners in Palestine in 1947. And I just basically laid it out as basically what happened in Palestine. I said that they should petition the United Nations, for their own land, and that the United Nations should be the final arbiter because we know that whatever the United Nations says goes. That's my whole thing about Israel. People say, well, the United Nations, the United Nations, UN Resolution 181, awarded 7% of the landowners 55% of the land in Palestine. And it's really not Palestine anyway. No one called it Palestine. It was a creation of this and that and everything. And, and I just basically showed how the Native Americans could take over part of Montana. And if they're awarded 55%, there's obviously going to be some white people. There's going to be some Americans in there who are homeowners, but they're either going to have to follow the laws or get off that land. And if they don't get off, if they don't get off that land, they may have to be herded into certain little cities and they may need to be controlled. And, I thought it would be a good idea that Native Americans from all around the country could actually start coming to that land. And, if they needed a house, they could just take a house that formerly belonged to one of the white people who was forced out, had the white Nakba, and I thought it was just a good way to try to explain what exactly happened in 1947 and 1948, because, our newspapers are just filled with Hasbara, Zionist propaganda. And, the New York Times it will rarely ever say anything bad about what Israel does. But, it was what they did to the Arabs that lived in Palestine in 1947 to me was, I call the Nakba their trail of tears. It was just as bad as what, the United States government did to Native Americans here, basically putting them into their own little sections and putting them into the worst sections where they can't grow anything and they can't, these quote unquote reservations, which are, but they can't be so bad because you can leave if you want to, but you don't have, you have to abandon your history and, you have to abandon your history and your culture. And I guess history and culture is important to, the Zionists, but, it can't be important to everyone else. I think you can see I take this a little personal, having having being someone who believes 100% in property rights and private property rights, and also somebody who has a significant amount of Jewish blood in them. I have no problem with I don't put it this way. I don't play identity politics.
So, I thought the great thing about the episode was, and how you framed it, just because I think there's so many libertarians who are also the types that like Ben Shapiro or, Steven Crowder, I think his name is, who are just terrible on the issue. And so, you kind of alluded to, Hezbollah a little bit. Do you want to just get into I guess, what would happen if you had just laid it out as it is? Why not? Why do you have to even kind of mask it?
Well, I did do that. I had Jermey R. Hammond on I believe it's episode 85, and he wrote the book Obstacle to Peace, the U.S., basically I'm sorry, how the U.S. has become the obstacle to peace between the Israeli and the Palestinians, which I don't believe is 100% true. But if you read his book, you start to understand that, it's a lot more complicated. But so I had him on. It's the longest podcast I ever did. It's 2 hours and 5 minutes. And he basically laid out from the beginning of the 20th century, way before 1947, all the way up through Operation Cast Lead to, and then after that, going more into the peace, what they call the peace process. And so he laid it out. He laid out the facts of the case. And there's so much when I talk about this on social media, there's so many, I see libertarians, people who consider themselves to be strong libertarians who don't understand the whole who will preach private property, but don't understand how private property was, how much of a crime this was. And so I honestly, if you want to ask me why I did it the way I did it, because I'm a sarcastic jerk. I'm a pain in the ass. Anyone who knows me, knows me from social media knows I'm a pain in the ass. And I thought it would be a good way to jab at people, especially people who listen to me who aren't willing to open up their minds to exactly what's going on there. And I knew I took a risk because the same people who would poo-poo the Palestinian situation probably poo-poo the Native American situation. But still, I had fun with it, and I thought it was clever. And it got a lot better reception than I thought it was going to. I didn't get as much negativity about it, and I actually had overwhelming positive support. So that made me happy.
Well, I'm sure you're aware of Scott Horton's, kind of opinion on the issue is that the reason that people are bad on the, Israel-Palestine stuff is just because they don't know the first thing about it. And, in my case, that was definitely true. I grew up in a Republican household and was very pro-war, listened to Sean Hannity and everything. But I just happened to learn about the Israel-Palestine thing before I ever, was old enough to understand anything going on in the media about it. And so I was always just happened to kind of be an off issue that I was good on. I support the war in Iraq and everything else, but, I kind of just knew about that. And, I think that's something that could happen by doing a show that way for libertarians who really don't know the first thing about the issue, but then they listen to your episode and they start to put themselves in the position of the Palestinians, and maybe then they could finally get it. And again, your episode, with, 84 that I'll link to in the show notes page, I listened to it twice. It was so informative, and it really helps you to understand why the Palestinians are so upset. And that's kind of why I want to get into nets with you is, from the libertarian position, it's about property rights and who's the aggressor. And so, that's the most important thing to look at, because I think most libertarians who are probably bad on this issue are probably bad on it because they think the Palestinians are aggressing against the Israelis who are just trying to live in their peaceful country.
Well, if you've paid attention to what's happened in Palestine over the last few weeks, the IDF has killed multiple Palestinians. And it's basically what we're seeing is people, one side with state-of-the-art technology, weapons technology, a lot of it American, shooting at people throwing rocks at them. people shooting at people rolling flaming tires up against a fence. I mean, I think it's important, and Scott Horton always says this, that, there's no good actors on either side. There really isn't. I mean, once Hamas took over there, it was an easy propaganda campaign against the Palestinians. But you have to remember, all those people who live there, they're not Hamas. A lot of those people are not Hamas. They're just children. They are just mothers and fathers. And they are in this concentrated area where if they decide to drop a bomb, there is no way to surgically strike. If you drop a bomb in the middle of Gaza, you're going to kill innocent people. And I know that people have been, the propaganda that there are no innocent people there, and a lot of it might be that, there are a lot of Israelis that are light skinned and speak English against these, and there's dark skinned people on the other side who speak something that sounds like gibberish to the average American. So it's very easy to choose sides in that way. But I think people really have to look and understand that it's apartheid. It is, and what is happening there is pure apartheid. They can't leave without permission. They're rationed. Their power is rationed. Their water is rationed. Their food is rationed. They can't grow anything, so everything has to come in from the outside. If boats have pulled up to try to deliver goods to them, and everybody on the boat has been killed, and these are just they use the old excuse. Well, they're Hamas. They're agents from Lebanon. I mean, it's just. I don't, and the insane thing about all of this is there's no answer to how to fix it. There's literally no answer to how to fix it other than, tear down the fence and let them go somewhere else. And that's what people say. People who don't understand the situation go, well, why don't they just leave? They can't. Israel won't let them. They built a fence around them. It's like they have their own target practice. And that's literally what it's like. And they go over there and they can fly drones over and practice their drone warfare and basically an indigenous, wears a couple rockets over the fence back at them. And that's what the world gets upset at. No, not the chemical weapons that were used in Operation Cast Lead or anything like that, the depleted uranium rounds that were shot into there, the white phosphorus it's like I said, there's no good sides, but there is clearly an aggressor. So, people need to study it. People really need to study it. Go listen to episode 85 of my podcast. It's 2 hours and 5 minutes. Jermey R. Hammond he's a great researcher. I've had him on for three vastly different subjects that he's become an expert on through research. And, and he's on Twitter. You listen to that and you have any questions, tweet at him. He'll answer you the best he can, as long as you're not being a jerk, because he can be a jerk right back too. So, and I think Kyle, so can I.
Yeah. One of the interesting things you talked about there is that, the Palestinians are throwing stones and rolling tires. And I think a lot of people would just believe that, no, they're actually doing more in that, kind of just the Hamas propaganda. But I actually saw a meme that the IDF tweeted out that talked about the weapons that Hamas was using in the protest. And those weapons were rods, Molotov cocktails, burning tires, kites with, I think, Molotov cocktails on them, ropes of people pulling on the fence. I mean, it was almost, it would have been humorous if it wasn't so, painfully true and terrible for the Palestinians. But, that's actually their propaganda. That's the Israeli propaganda, is that they're rolling tires at the fence. Therefore, we have to shoot them.
And you have to ask yourself this. And I'm sure there are Americans who've asked themselves this, if these people are such vermin, why isn't Israel just exterminated them by now? I swear, I mean, I have no proof of this, but it's almost like they just want to inflict pain upon these people. And it's like I said, you cannot prove to me that I do not know the population of the occupied territories there.
There's about 2 million people in Gaza. I think 80% are refugees and 51% are under 18 years old.
Yeah. Well, whenever you have a place where people are just murdered over and over again, the median age just goes down. I mean, it's but are you serious? Is anybody going to try and convince me that 2 million people are terrorists? That there are 2 million terrorists there? I mean, there are people just struggling to survive there. There are people there who are struggling with cancer right now from, chemical weapons that have been used. I mean, there's just, it all goes back, and it all goes back to the founding. It all goes back to 1947 and 1948. It's just, they decided, they decided to use the power and the wealth they had to go in there and to occupy a land, basically, and to kick people. They're famous. You can actually go on the internet and you can search, Palestinian house keys, and you'll see pictures of people holding keys up, and they're keys to houses that Zionists live in right now that were just taken away from them and given to somebody else. I mean, if you're a Jew and you want to go back to Israel, in many occasions, they will just give you a house. And a lot of those houses were just taken from, Arabs and the Palestinians who live there. It's, I can't say it enough that, the leadership on both sides is really, really evil, but one side has superior firepower and superior political power and is exercising it exponentially, and in my estimation, in an evil way, when they should be doing everything that they can to help these people. And I don't know what much more to be said about it.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like when I saw the images of, young children walking towards the fence and being shot in the head, that the Israeli state cannot view the people of Gaza as anything other than rabid dogs who will immediately, sit themselves on the first Israeli they see. If that's the kind of policy that you're carrying out, and, people are fine with it. It's not like there's massive protests in Israel. I mean, I guess the one decent thing I could say about the people of the United States is I imagine if, Trump ordered the border guards to start shooting the migrant caravan, that at least some Americans would have shown up and tried to, harass the border guards a little bit. Not like what happened with, Israel here, where you have all the snipers celebrating shooting a child and, just kind of recording it on video. So.
Yeah. And when you look at those videos, you don't see, these aren't children who are attacking, they're walking towards a fence. I mean, and this isn't, and just in the last 3 weeks, this isn't, this has happened before. It's not like this is anything new. I mean, I've seen video of Israeli citizens jumping the fence and burning down olive trees, which are a potential source of food. They have very few, like I said before, they have very few chances there's very little cultivation, anything to cultivate there. The one thing is famously olive trees, and they were laughing, and these were like, teenagers just taking joy in this. And Abby Martin, if you look up Abby Martin on YouTube, her interviews with, people on the streets in Israel, and they're, clearly they're Israeli citizens who just admit to Abby Martin that they should just basically kill those people. They need to kill those people. It's the only way that they're going to be able to live in peace and to solve this problem. And I don't know what to say about, that attitude of, you have one group of people on one side of the fence who are living in the 21st century, and you have another group of people on the other side of the fence who are living in the single digits and, the 6th or 7th century, and not by choice. A lot of them are just stuck there. A lot of them, like you said, are refugees from other places. And it's just mind boggling what's going on there. I don't know how the UN, the same body that gave them, the same body that awarded them 55% of that land, has brought them up, has accused them and shown that they've done human rights violations over 30 times. And they say, oh, well, screw the United Nations. They're pro-Muslim and everything. They gave you that. They actually awarded you that land, even though it's illegitimate. I mean, a contract both sides have to agree on a contract. If one side doesn't agree, then the contract is null and void. I mean, if the UN came in and said that Texas should go back to Mexico, and I think the United States would have something to say about that. It's just not like the UN can make unilateral decisions. But I really wish I had a concrete answer for why the world doesn't look at the situation over there like I do. But, I'm also a person who clearly at some point started to notice propaganda in the media and started to look past it. So
I want to shift gears a little bit, and you don't only do 2-hour podcast episodes, in depth on subjects. You also do something quite the opposite, and that is make a lot and share a lot of memes. At least on my Twitter feed, you are the king of memes. So what do you like so much about, making memes, especially sharing the ones about war and foreign policy? And a lot of them I think are very powerful.
Well, I think a lot of people look at memes and they will comment. Their immediate comment is that most memes are just straw men. And when it comes to, and that's true. I mean, that could be true about a lot of things. I mean, it could be true about, gun control memes, stuff like that. You just do stuff that's over the top, but it's really, really hard to exaggerate when you're talking about anti-war memes. It's really hard to exaggerate and straw man mass murder and aggression. So any kind of if it's an anti-war meme, I really try to take great care that whatever I present in there is easily verifiable and that it's powerful and delivers a very clear message as to why, especially the wars that the United States are involved in now, are just absolutely ridiculous and just have to be abandoned. I mean, it has to be abandoned right now.
Yeah. So I guess just wondering a little bit, how do you kind of balance that? Because the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, I mean, the United States is involved in so many conflicts that are so long. It has to be hard to get it, factually correct and fit on an image. Do you get a lot of critiques saying that you're oversimplifying and stuff like that? And do you find if you do any follow-up conversations helpful in spreading the message?
Well, you're always going to get pushback. War is, I guess I was going to say war is complicated. War is cut and dry, but war is very simple to me. You do not attack somebody unless they're directly, you do not raise a gun to somebody unless they're raising a gun to you or they're threatening to do it. After 9/11, the United States should have went and killed Osama bin Laden and everyone that was loyal to him, everyone that was in his immediate circle, and then turned around and went home. They had a chance to do that. If you read Scott Horton's book, Fool's Errand, they had a chance to do that. Not McMaster, but Mattis was actually on the ground there, and they didn't do it. So the one argument you get the most is if they were to leave right now, things would get worse. It's not provable. That's just not something that you can prove. It's your opinion. It's your opinion that if the United States just picked up and left Afghanistan, things would get worse. Well, if you know anything about Afghanistan pre 9/11, they were were they friendly with Osama bin Laden? They put up with Osama bin Laden, but, they also, after 9/11, offered to turn him over to various countries because the Taliban really didn't like him. But now, if you were to leave Afghanistan, it's unprovable. I mean, these are people who the Afghani people don't want to leave. Most of them don't want to leave their homeland. Most of them are rooted there. So, not to mention, how many of the 9/11 attackers were Saudi? After 9/11, I didn't have great knowledge I didn't have knowledge of foreign policy as a lot of people did, but I understood that if the majority of attackers were from Saudi Arabia, that Saudi Arabia was probably the enemy. So when they announced that they were going into Afghanistan, that made no sense to me. And then, a couple of years later, they make the case for Iraq, which made even less sense to me. And I wasn't a libertarian at the time. It didn't make sense. So going back to the meme, I know I went over here. Now I'm going to bring it back over here. People push back on memes, but mostly it's because they want to say that it's complicated. You really don't understand. And it's like, no, I've read the books. I've studied it. I do understand. It's not complicated. If you leave them alone, it's like the whole, if we don't fight them over there, we'll fight them over here. That's another thing that's not provable. It's not provable. Or maybe it's the exact opposite. If you're fighting them over there, things like San Bernardino and the Pulse shooting happen here. Maybe these people need to come home and, as Ron Paul talked about in 2007 in his run for the presidency, maybe these soldiers need to come home and protect the borders, protect the homeland. I'm not a I'm not a paleo libertarian. I'm more of an anarchist, but, that makes, if you're going to have if you're going to have a status foreign policy, it makes more sense to me that you protect the homeland than go nation building and try to turn everyone into the United States, which doesn't work. Just look at what happened with the Iraqi election recently, and look at Afghanistan. You have polling, voter sign-up places in Afghanistan blowing up almost weekly now. They don't want democracy. They want to be left to do what they have been doing for thousands of years, and I think we should let them.
Right, and I think with the polling stations, I'm guessing like ISIS and the Taliban will target them specifically to try to delegitimize whatever elections results roll in, and I'm sure the United States will probably tamper with those results a little bit. I think my favorite anti-war meme that I've seen you post is the one about Yemen, where it shows them loading rockets onto like a Predator drone or a ship, and it talks about how we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars per rocket to blow up a structure in Yemen or people in Yemen that like live on $1 a day. And, the total collateral damage from the missile strike is, far less of capital value than the missile itself. And, we spent millions of dollars, on the plane that's used to blow it up and refueling the plane, all this other stuff. So, I like the message of that meme in particular.
Yeah, it's a great meme, and it's also one of those memes where the argument's rock solid. I post that one probably like every couple of weeks. I don't think anyone's ever tried to challenge that. It just makes so much sense that another one that's in that vein is it's a picture of a fighter. I can't remember which fighter it is, but it's dropping a bomb on the Flintstones. And on the bottom of it, it says, American foreign policy explained. And that's basically what's going on right now is you have some of the most advanced technology that the world has ever known being used to kill, maim, and destroy people who live like they're in the 8th or 9th century. And the worst thing about it is that the people that make excuses that, well, if they're living in the 8th and 9th century, maybe we should get rid of them. Maybe they're a threat to us. I don't know how, the average Yemeni who's living his life over there and living and tilling the land that his family has tilled for 1,000 years is a threat to me. I think they just want to be left alone like we want to be left alone. And I think to not leave them alone is to bring things like 9/11 upon yourself.
Well, I mean, Scott Horton tells a story in his book Fool's Errand about U.S. troops going to Rural Valley in Afghanistan. And then the people who lived in that valley thought they were the Soviets because they just had no idea what was going on. And so to pretend like, just because somebody's a rural Muslim farmer means they're, backwards religious people who want to blow up the United States of America couldn't be further from the truth. It's not that they don't care about the United States of America. It's that they have no idea, where it is or what they're doing really.
Well, they don't care. Well, I think they just don't care. They want to be left alone. They're like us. I just want to be left alone. My politics has always been, even before I was a libertarian, which I guess means is that my politics has always been libertarian, is I just want to be left alone. And I mean, what more can a human who was born on this earth ask than to be left alone? I just why are you bothering me? I mean, I think, when you look at like the number of radicalized Muslims that there were before 2001, before 9/11 was like minuscule. And, even if you look at like the 9/11 attackers, and Scott talks about this in his book, how many of them weren't even, strict Muslims. I mean, they went to strip clubs, they drank, they did coke, they saw this as, it was politics to them. And people can't understand that, how somebody would be willing to give up their, to commit suicide, like flying a plane into a building. But it's no different than an American choosing to go to war in Iraq or Afghanistan. I mean, the chances are that, you take the chance that when you go over there, go into a land where everyone's hostile to you. I mean, just look at Vietnam. If you can't learn from Vietnam, where you don't know who the enemy is. I mean, it's remarkable to me. Foreign policy to me is really simple. I may not be versed, I don't know, I can't tell you everyone who was part of the Northern Alliance and everything like that, but I can tell you that having to go into Afghanistan and just make alliances with those people was some of the most insane stuff I've ever read about. Where you're basically saying, okay, if you get on our side, we'll protect your poppy fields. And you can see pictures, and that's not a conspiracy theory. You can see pictures online. They're there, it's just nuts, man. It is American foreign policy. Once you really start to understand exactly what's going on, when you read anything, you shake your head because it makes no fucking sense. There's no reason that any of this should be going on.
Yeah, and there was a great article out by James Bovard today about how, the United States has, over the course of the Afghan war, supported the warlords who engage in, pedophilia with little boys. And they talked about stories about how United States troops were told just to sit by while it happened. And, that's, just more of those consequences. But before we wrap up, I just wanted to know what our favorite or what you thought the most effective anti-war meme was. That way I could share it a bunch of times.
I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you in DM. It's a great meme. It's my favorite anti-war meme right now because it'll make you laugh, but it's really not funny. And it's a 2-tiered meme right on top of each other. And there's anybody who knows memes would recognize this woman. She is the typical liberal psychopath, just screaming at the top of her lungs with her face all contorted. And the meme on the top says, "You want lower taxes because you hate the poor." And there's a guy on the bottom who is pointing down to a headline in the LA Times. And there's a caption that says, "No, actually, I want lower taxes because," and it has the LA Times headline that says, "In Syria, militias armed by the Pentagon fight those armed by the CIA. And I tell people this in conversations all the time. You know, when people bring up foreign policy with me, you know, especially face to face, I'm like, go on the internet and search Pentagon-backed forces fight CIA-backed forces in Syria. And they're like, that can't possibly be. And I'm like, it's a fact, man. The reason I love this meme so much is it just shows the complete absurdity of American foreign policy. And you think about it, a couple months ago, you had Turkish forces invaded Syrian Kurdistan, where there was American forces there, and fighting against American-backed Kurdish forces and the Turks are a NATO partner. The world is mad. I mean, this is absolute madness, and people just don't know about it because the nightly news isn't going to report on it, and unless they go to websites like Libertarian Institute or antiwar.com or, you know, Zero Hedge, places like that, they're just not going to get this news. And it's easily verifiable. It's not, you know, this is not made up stuff. They show you the evidence is there. And I don't know, man, that meme, whenever I put that meme out, people are just like, are you serious, man? And I'm like, look it up, man. It's insane. You could literally have American forces. You could have American forces fighting American forces in Syria if things were, you know, if things were set, if this were an actual, you know, if it wasn't a proxy, if the United States didn't use so many proxies as they do, like in what they're doing with Saudi Arabia and Yemen.
Right. And I think in some of those cases, it was even worse in that the CIA-backed forces were actually linked to Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, or ISIS. And so it's not just that the CIA was backing, you know, Sunni resistance to Assad in Syria. They were backing Sunni resistance to Assad in Syria that was dealing weapons to al-Nusra, that was just giving weapons away to them, that was joining al-Nusra, that at times was probably just the, Al-Qaeda guys in disguise. And so, you know, the absurdity of American foreign policy is truly hard to understand. And when you have a headline like that from the LA Times, you could really use it to like get people to, you know, perk up and listen to what you have to say. Because if you know crazy stuff like that, that's true, then, you know, that you may build some credibility in other places.
Yeah, man. It's, you know, I use memes to, you know, I hate to say it, but people have such short attention spans. People, you know, and both of the books that I've written I use memes in those books as jumping off points, a lot because I want to hit young people. You know, I want to reach out to young people. And, you know, my new book about the radical left, especially the campus left, you know, who should be anti-war, but, you know, the anti-war left is gone. Oh my God, what the hell happened to them? You know, I use memes as a jumping off point for my commentaries on what's going on. And, I have people tell me they can't read books, you know, and I have slight autism, and which is actually a good thing because it allows me to be able to study and to really concentrate on certain subjects, better than I think most people could. I can sit down and actually read 1,000-page books, but most people just can't do that right now. And I try to do whatever I can to reach out to them. And, you know, it seems that people really, really like memes. And, you know, it's funny, after the 2016 election and memes were so talked about, you know, oh, memes got Donald Trump elected and everything like that. I was like, are memes going to disappear? Man, I think it's part of the zeitgeist now. I think I don't think they're going anywhere. I think people are going to continue to use them, and I'm going to use them as much as I can to reach as many people as possible. And hopefully one of these days I'll actually write a real book and, show people that I'm a little bit smarter than I let on, with, some of the memes that I put out there. So
Well, please keep putting out the memes because I think a lot of them are very important and, convey important messages to people who, like you said, don't have the attention span to, do things like listen to hour-long podcasts about foreign policy. But thank you so much for coming on the show today, Mance. Your podcast is Freeman Beyond the Wall and the website is freemanbeyondthewall.com. You're the author of The Kids Are Not All Right and Freedom Through Memedom. Is there anywhere else you want to send people? What's your Twitter?
Twitter is at MN Rothbard. So you can probably tell that I'm a huge Murray Rothbard fan, especially economics and just the philosophy of freedom. Yeah, that and check out the books. If the first book, Freedom Through Memedom, is really it's my Murray Rothbard wrote Anatomy of the State, basically, delegitimizing the state. And that's the purpose of my Freedom Through Memedom is 31-day study guide. And the whole purpose of that was to get people to have a radical distrust of the state using everything possible, from policing down to foreign policy to economics, everything. And the second book was written specifically for young people, especially young people who might be thinking about going to college, to basically show them exactly what's going on college campuses right now and to try and inoculate them from the brainwashing, the more Marxist brainwashing. And the thing I hate about Marxism is they are not anti-war. You cannot look at Marxist theology and history and ignore the fact that they're violent at every turn. So that's what I was trying to get at with that one. So, yeah, but, yeah. So if either one of those subjects interests you, especially if you want it for young people, check out those books. I think they're available on Amazon. Just search Mance Rayder, you'll see them. And, I think I had Scott Horton wrote a mini forward for Freedom Through Memedom, and the great Dave Smith wrote a rather lengthy forward for The Kids Are Not All Right. So they got Jeff Deist wrote a blurb for the back. The president of the Mises Institute wrote a blurb for the back of The Kids Are Not All Right. So I must be doing something right because I'm getting endorsements from all the right people.
All right, well, keep it up, and I hope to have you on the show again.
All right, but anytime, and you keep up the good work too. I love your work.